Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Jana Ossoff. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the director of Free Her Vermont. Thank you so much for joining us for such a vital conversation today. Today's panel will invite us to examine how incarceration, whether it be carceral or psychiatric, perpetuates systemic civil rights violations, especially for historically oppressed communities. In these dark times, it is imperative that we begin experimenting with different ways to move forward. The current structure of our society is unsustainable, and we must have the courage to try something new, especially as prisons are becoming an increasingly potent weapon for the fascist administration to wage their attacks against migrants, dissenters, and activists. And while people continue to descend into deeper poverty and we lose social safety nets at an extraordinary rate, we must turn to investing in care over control. And it's important to acknowledge that we are gathering today on the unceded land of the Indokina people, otherwise known as Vermont. And in the shadow of systems built on stolen land, stolen labor, and ongoing dispossession, our conversation today is a part of a long lineage of resistance and reimagining. Joining us today are powerful voices whose work spans movement lawyering, direct service, psychiatric and carceral abolition, and grassroots organizing. Each panelist brings lived experience and visionary strategy to the space. Up first, we have Wilda White, the Executive Director of Mad Freedom Advocates. And next to Wilda, we have Kareem Chapman, the ED of Life Intervention Team and the former Executive Director of Vermont Psychiatric Survivor. And joining us virtually, we have Kira Kelly, an attorney with Climate Defense Project. And I'm just going to pass it to each of our panelists to tell us a little bit more about who they are and what brings them to the space. Wilda, would you like to start? Or Kareem?
I could go
Yeah.
first. Hey, everybody.
Hey.
How's everybody doing? All right. So I'm Kareem Chapman, originally from Harlem, New York, and migrated to Vermont, I always say because of my wife. And I've been here for 10 years. I am a person with lived experience, a Christian man saved by grace, and I spent almost 10 years in federal prison. Through that process, I've been able to help support people who are currently in gangs, who were in gangs, people who are homeless, dealing with all kind of vulnerable situations and issues in life. And I'm just so grateful to be here to share my story and to get my perspective on change. Thank you.
Kareem.
You got it.
My name is Wilda White. I am a MAD activist, a psychiatric survivor. And by that, I mean I am somebody who has survived the mental health system. And the reason I'm here is because I live to tell about it. And it's become my life purpose. Before I was involved in the mental health system, I was involved in the gay rights movement, the women's movement, civil rights. I was also the guardian of my brother, who has a diagnosis of schizophrenia. And so I saw the mental health system from the perspective of a family member. Then I had my own involvement in the mental health system. And ever since then, I have just been, and I'm also an attorney, and also taught at UC Berkeley School while there ran the social justice and got very much involved in the abolition. So after having my experience, personal experience in the mental health system, I came to see those two systems as the same. And so I'm here to talk about that because I think a lot of people think of our mental health system as a system of care, when in fact it is a system of coercion and control. And unless we understand that, we will never improve that system.
Thank you, Wilda. Kira, would you like to share?
Sure. Hey, everybody. It's an honor to be in this conversation with you all. My name is Kira. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. I'm zooming in from occupied Dakota territory in what is now also called Minneapolis, but I'm rooted in Vermont, grew up there, and I'll be back soon. And Yeah, I guess, so I work part-time as a staff attorney at the Climate Defense Project. And I have a part-time exclusively pro bono solo practice where I represent people who are either being criminalized for their existence in a racial capitalist society, or they're being criminalized or targeted or repressed for their resistance trying to build a more liberated world. Yeah, I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. As you can see, we have a wide range of perspectives today on our panel. And I think it's really important, especially why we bring in our psychiatric abolitionists as well, because in our path of thinking about what a future can look like, a lot of people place weight on mental health facilities as being an alternative. And we're here to share that unfortunately, this isn't a viable alternative for it. So I just very much appreciate Wilda with sharing her identities with us and experiences. Okay, so we're going to transition into a panel. We'll answer about like 4 or 5 questions, and we'll close with a Q&A. So if any kind of questions or thoughts come up, please note them and we will circle back to them later. The first question we will start with is, how does incarceration function as a civil rights violation for the communities you work with or belong to, particularly for historically oppressed communities?
Sure, you went first last time, I'll go first this time.
Go for it.
Unless you want to go first.
I can also go first if you like.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so this is kind of the bread and butter question for what I do with Free Her. Free Her, as folks may or may not know, we are a very grassroots collective of prison abolitionists, and our main goal is to stop Vermont's plans to build new prisons and also close Vermont's one women's prison. And instead of having this system of violence, we envision replacing it with a coordinated, robust system of care that actually addresses the root causes of why people engage in criminalized behavior. So through our work, we work primarily with people that are incarcerated in the women's prison or were formerly incarcerated. And just through our experiences with them alone, we've been able to see how civil rights violations are an inherent aspect of the incarcerative experience. It touches on every sphere of life, from labor to their safety, to healthcare, to family integrity, to housing. There's not an inch of someone's life that isn't impacted by the devastation of incarceration. And I feel I would be remiss not to center that these systems are the modern day iteration of chattel slavery, and they perpetuate systemic racism. Back in 2022, the Council of State Government presented to Vermont finding that Black Vermonters were 6 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white Vermonter. And we only make up 1.5% of Vermont's population, but an overwhelming 11.7% of Vermont's prison population. This just shows you through the data how this system functions as a tool of racial targeting and racial violence. And this violence deepens behind the walls with who's being targeted and punished by staff. So if you look at who's in solitary confinement, that is over 21% of people identify as Black and brown. And similarly, 25% of the people in ADSEG are Black or brown. And ADSEG is essentially solitary confinement, but there's more discretion of the officers on who they can place in based on who they think of as a threat. And we know things like racial stereotyping and discrimination weighs into what people consider a threat. Similarly, how this system functions as a continuation of slavery is the economic oppression. Not considering all the fines and penalties and barriers to employment and housing that happen after incarceration. While folks are in prison, they're working for cents on the hour. We sent in a survey to the women's prison, and the highest wage people were making was $7 a day. And that was on the higher side. Usually people are making $3, $4 a day when commissary is charging regular prices for shoes, hygienic products, food. We're charging for phone calls and envelopes. Women sometimes, 4 women at a time, use one envelope to write us. These are just more evidence of how our society doesn't care for people that are in poverty or struggling. We just punish people. Um, and this isn't just Vermont. Nationwide, incarceration generates $7 services good. And this is just the continuation of exploiting Black and brown bodies. I just want to pause there to make sure there's enough time for other panelists, but that is just two of the very stark civil rights systemic violations we see. Wilder, Kareem, Kira?
Yeah, I want to begin by just making sure you understand when we use the word incarceration, what that means for the community that I'm talking about today. As a psychiatric survivor, when I talk about incarceration, I'm not talking about necessarily jails or prisons. I'm including involuntary hospitalization, forced drugging, seclusion, restraints, court-ordered treatment in the community. In Vermont, they call it orders of non-hospitalization, warrants for emergency examination. When people can just show up, for example, what happened to me when I was teaching at UC Berkeley School of Law, a police officer just showed up in my office, knocked on the door, said he had come to arrest me to take me to a psychiatric hospital because he heard from my psychiatrist that I was suicidal. And I'm at my desk working, trying to plan the curriculum for the coming semester, and I was actually on the phone and said to him, I'm working, and he was wearing plain clothes, and he just pulled aside his jacket to show me his gun. And so, I hope you can all appreciate the irony of a police officer showing up to take me into custody because I'm suicidal and then threatening homicide at the same time. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about kind of psychiatric incarceration. And for psychiatric survivors, especially those of us who are not white, who are disabled, or otherwise marginalized, this is a civil rights crisis because we lose our bodily autonomy, we lose our freedom of movement, our privacy, our right to refuse medical interventions, and often our right to parent, to work, because someone has decided we are mentally ill. After my own personal experience with psychiatry, I could not find a job. I went from, being on the faculty of a university, all advanced degrees, to working as a farmer, harvesting crops, simply because I had a psychiatric history. So this is very much a civil rights issue. And I think psychiatric and carceral systems work together to mark certain bodies and minds as problems, to be contained, rather than people whose rights must be protected. And once you are inside that web, whether through a prison sentence or a civil commitment or a history of involuntary treatment, it becomes easier for the state to override your choices and harder for you to exercise any of the rights that most of us have. So the communities I work with and belong to, incarceration, whether in prison or a psychiatric institution, isn't just about individual bad experiences. It is a structural way the state decides whose rights are durable, whose rights are enduring, and whose rights are conditional, revocable, and negotiable. And that is why I see this as a core civil rights issue and not just a clinical issue or a public safety issue.
That's good. Good. Thank you, Wilda. I remember seeing my mother never sit down when I was a kid. My mother worked 4 jobs, raising 5 kids in the projects in Harlem, New York. And as a young man, I just really didn't understand why my mother had to work so hard. And I made a lot of bad choices through that feeling, which eventually landed me into federal prison, almost serving 10 years. Incarceration wasn't helping me at all. It made things actually worse. I traveled the world with the Boys Choir of Harlem, sang in different languages, met people. I still made bad choices and wound up in federal prison. I was punished for making choices that weren't right, and I take full responsibility for those. But while inside, I became a different kind of person. I remember my first day figuring out what's going to happen here. Like, I've never been around men doing life in prison, and there was no education for us there. There was no real programs. The only thing that I could rely on is survival. And that turned me into a different person. So incarceration is not reform. For some people, you come out worse. And only by the grace of God, I came out on fire for God and wanted to build my community that I once destroyed. And I started a program in Harlem, Snug, to help on their prison, and we were able to. But why do I got to be while I'm and I want to do the best that I could, and I wasn't given opportunity to do that at all. I mean, I saw people get stabbed and other things happen to them, and I was afraid. On the street, I felt I was who I thought I was until you go inside and you think you're not who you thought you was. And I just thank God that I came out alive, but there was no reform there. And even when you try to go to school, only certain people were allowed to do that. I was in federal prison and rich, and they got benefits that would even in federal prison. So again, I would love to see us change what reform really means and what it restorative practices should be in prison or in jails. I learned that skill, and it helped me through a lot of my life in the last 10 years. So can we talk about what that looks like? What is real reform? Because this thing we call reform is not real. It doesn't help anyone. And we're going back and forth about how we change systemic issues, and we're just talking. So I'm here to say, let's have real conversation about it, real action steps. And, people like Jana, who is trying every day to try to figure it out, she should be supported. Mad Freedom should be supported. Groups who are trying to do the work on the ground should be supported. So I'll just stop right there. But what is real reform? And when you're in prison, are you really being reformed? Or are you just being punished?
Thank you, Kareem. Kira, do you have anything for this question?
Sure. Just to add a bit, I mean, I think everybody really covered it quite well. Like, incarceration is a civil rights crisis because of the way that our basic human rights just don't exist when the state has complete control, and everything is commodified. I have clients and friends and loved ones who share stories of their experiences that are just horrific, and it's the violence of the is that who was that said that? Might have been Ruth Wilson Gilmore. It just talks about the everyday violence that becomes mundane because it happens to everybody when they're incarcerated. And I notice this in particular with clients of mine who maybe they're white environmentalists who don't come from a criminalized family, or maybe this is the first time they've ever experienced incarceration or had contact with even the court system, and they're shocked. Whereas when I have clients who, maybe they got arrested at a protest, but they've got loved ones who have experienced incarceration, or they've been in before, that they've had these types of experiences and exposures. I mean, it's shocking, but it's not surprising. Just the mountain of injustices and unfairness and the ways that this entire system of prisons and incarceration is set up on making corporations profit off of people suffering.
Kira, you're cutting out a little there.
Uh-oh.
Maybe.
Should I, how's that? Can close some tabs.
Would folks mind if Kira just cut her video? It might improve the audio coming through.
Let me, well, I see I'm frozen.
We can see you walking around, but maybe if you turn off your video, the audio will improve.
Okay. Doo-doo.
Oh, the captions are fine? Okay, we've got closed captioning, Kira. Never mind.
Can't see the captions and I'm hard hearing.
Here, do you want me to, let me log out and back on again and see if that helps?
Thanks everyone for
Sorry about
just
this.
rolling with this. Okay. While we wait for Kira to return, I think it would be a great time to transition to our second question, which has already been touched on a bit. But our second question of the evening is, what myths about care, safety, or reform do you encounter in your work, and how do you challenge them?
I'll go first this time. I think one of the biggest myths I encounter is that mental health system is fundamentally caring, and that if we simply expanded it, people would be safer. For many psychiatric survivors, what is called care is experienced as coercion and control. I talked about the locked wards, the forced injections, forced like electroconvulsive therapy without any meaningful consent. These are really deeply intrusive state actions with lifelong consequences. And expanding this system that's built on control does not produce safety. It just provides a more efficient machinery of control. A second myth that I encountered, and in fact I heard last night on one of the panel on fair and impartial policing, is that police violence and mental health crises is mainly caused by individuals' untreated mental illness rather than by saneism, which is the prejudice that casts people in distress as dangerous, irrational, and less fully human. And that myth shows up whenever a killing is explained as a tragedy that could have been avoided if the person had just gotten more treatment or stayed in treatment longer. It relocates the problem inside the victim's body and brain instead of inside the systems and beliefs that made that encounter deadly. We would never accept an analysis of police killings of Black people that said the core issue is not enough services for Black communities or not enough Black people in treatment. We would recognize that as victim blaming that erases racism. The same is true here. If we don't name saneism, we will blame the dead instead of the systems that killed them. I challenge these myths by centering lived experience and survivor testimony, telling the truth about the harms of involuntary treatment and forced care, and insisting that voluntary, survivor-led, non-coercive supports are not optional add-ons. They are the only path to generate true safety.
One big thank you for that. That was awesome. So one big myth that I see in the folks that I work with in Rutland County is the myth that the system works. I work with individuals all the time that, you know, I'm not going to the hospital. I'm not going there because they're just going to harm me. They're going to hurt me. And this is how they really feel. Every day I work with folks who say, I'm not going to go there because all they're going to do is look at me like a number, a statistic, and I'm not going to be treated like a human. And people have a fear of real harm. I see it every day. So let's stop lying to our people. We have a broken system that needs to be fixed, and we can't fix it if we're lying. And if it's all where people are fighting for funding and money to try to make a difference. I mean, I went through a whole 2 years of trying to help a group of people in Rutland, and I couldn't do it because it was a funding issue. It should not hurt to help. And we deal with people on the ground level who are trying to do the right thing. It always hurts us to try and help. We have to fight for pennies to help, and it doesn't work. So while we're fighting for funding to help people, people are dying. People are not getting their needs met, and it's hard. So again, do we want to keep harming people or figure out real action steps to get it done? Because right now we're not getting it done. We're talking a good game and it's not working. I've been a part of panels. I've testified. It feels like a big circle of talk, a big circle of talk. And don't get me wrong, there's some people doing some amazing work in the state, but it's not enough. And how many more people gotta die in this system for us to get it together? So I just say the myth, let's stop lying to our people and get it done right.
Thank you, Queen. This kind of segues perfectly into what we've been coming up against at Free Her. I would say the largest myth is that, a lot of the everyday people in our community don't really know what's happening beyond the walls. So it's easy to label incarceration as care and to make it seem like it's something it isn't. And with this new prison, we've been battling this, tagline that it's a trauma-informed prison with gender-responsive services. It's, a humane, progressive prison. And this is not unique to just Vermont. There are Department of Corrections across the country currently trying to rebrand incarceration as care. We connected with organizers in Illinois that are fighting a multi-million-dollar prison of their own. And it's eerie how exact the language is. It's almost like they're using the same textbook. And why this is a problem is the Department of Corrections in Vermont annually already receives $189 million to incarcerate around 1,500 people. And as they ask for more money because they're trying to say they are a care provider, they're siphoning vital resources from community-based organizations that have been forced to start closing their doors or downsizing because we don't have enough community dollars to pay for their work. And an even more dangerous dynamic is starting to emerge here, where we are changing the primary access point to care to be behind the prison walls. So people will have to receive records to receive treatment for the first time in their life. That should be immoral. And as we've heard, from Kareem and Wilda, like the state uses certain communities and certain groups to decide who's deserving of basic rights and basic care. And if you look at the data, the majority of folks incarcerated in our prison system are either struggling with substance use, mental health struggles, or they're deep in poverty or dealing with a combination of the three. Prisons essentially warehouses humans. It's not a true tool to help people recover. Um, and as Vermonters, we should want upstream solutions for our people. We shouldn't wait to fund things by the point where people are getting incarcerated.
That's right.
There has been a lot of fear mongering in society about who's actually incarcerated. We hear the myths of the big dangerous criminals, but once again, I like to go back to the data because when you're talking about big ideas like prison abolition, people understandably have a lot of fears. So I like to rely on information that is hard and solid. And people surveyed the women in Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility and found that 95% of them are survivors of domestic or sexual violence. And in 2014, a UVM study found that 25% of those incarcerated women grew up in foster care, and another 25% were homeless. So as you can see, these are folks we have failed, probably dating back to their childhood, that instead of funding education or supportive housing or other interventions, we waited till it got to the point of the emergency room or a cage. And that's just not right. And this is why we say abolish and not reform. This system is performing the way that it was supposed to. It's meant to strip people of its humanity. It's meant to exploit people and break them down. So I will just end there. And it looks like we have Kira back. Kira, did you want to finish up your answer to the first question, or did you want to talk about the myths of care and reform you run into?
I could probably combine them. Is the audio better? Thanks everyone for your patience. Yeah, I
Yes,
think
I think it's better. It may glitch. So if maybe slow and steady
okay.
talking.
Cool. You can if you like wave your hand a bit, I'll know I'm glitching. Okay, so yeah, I think the biggest myth that I encounter as somebody who represents a lot of like political activists and protesters, people that are getting arrested because they are forming encampments, protesting their college's complicity in the genocide, Israel's genocide against Palestine, or they are locking down to a piece of construction equipment to prevent a pipeline that's traversing treaty territory and devastating ecosystems in the Midwest and farther out west, that people who get arrested like kind of knowing that they're risking arrest and maybe haven't experienced criminalization before, they carry a lot of myths of fairness about what prison and incarceration is like. And there's also this kind of like pervasive myth amongst people that let me try going camera off. There's a pervasive myth amongst people that observe the court process that there are like quote unquote like good criminals and bad
Did
criminals,
we
or
lose
that
you,
like
Kira?
oh, I went off camera to see if that helped the audio. Can you
Okay,
hear
you
me?
just came back.
Does the going off camera help the audio?
No.
Um, I can try to speak slower.
Yeah, let's try that.
Okay, that's good practice for me. This myth that you can avoid prison by being a good person is like the myth I encountered the most. Which obviously like runs completely in the face of the lived experiences of people that like get arrested because you know cops are racist, like because things take money, because people are a lot of my clients are unhoused, and the things that they get arrested for, like people will go to prison for like taking a sandwich when they're starving, like literally. I have clients who have that experience, and it is such a privilege to not have to take legal risks. And I think that's the biggest myth that I encounter, is the idea that if you're in prison, it's because like you don't have enough morals to have avoided prison. When in reality, like it, the people that I know that I work with who are in prison, oftentimes, no matter what they did, it's like they had to make a really tough moral choice, and they did the best they could. And like statistics about the number of people in prison who are themselves survivors, and we see this, you know, too with like clients that get arrested for protesting, and then I hear other people, like I hear this from judges a lot, like, well, there's a right way and a wrong way to protest, and that's just bullshit. Like we don't have really, like it is a choice and a privilege to look away from things like the genocide in Palestine. And so there's a lot of people who are saying, I'm refusing to look away. And they make a hard moral choice and they break a law. And maybe they get locked up for it. And then a judge will say, oh, well, you protested the wrong way. And I really like appreciate the opportunity to push back on the myth that being in prison for anybody, for whatever reason you're there, means that you are immoral, when really so many people find themselves there because like of something totally out of their control, or from having to make the best of a situation where they don't have an easy moral or safe option.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kira. That was amazing. Okay.
Is that us?
Okay. So I'm going to keep us moving. I'm going to skip a question here. Let's jump to, what does healing and accountability look like outside of carceral systems? Anyone feeling excited about taking this first?
healing starts with understanding where people come from. Um, if you look at someone from the time they leave their door, going into the world and come back, you'll learn a lot about a person. Um, if they're starving, if they're just lonely. So I think we need to take more effort on learning about people. So, for example, our police departments know a lot about people who are committing crimes in our communities, right? They know everything. They got wiretaps, they have this, they have that. What if they just stop and say, you know what? We know all these things about this person here, John. Why not try to connect with John in a way before we just set up a stingray to get him arrested and put him away for 10, 15 years? Why can't we think about the person and what the alternative could be to incarceration? So what are we thinking about? Why can't we imagine a place where we don't have to put you in jail? Why can't we just say, you know what, John? What I've learned about you is that you were raised by a single mom who was on drugs. How could you survive that? And John, while you were stealing and going into cars at night and can't get off of drugs, how can we help you, John, to get into a better place? But if you don't, listen, all these guys down there, they're going to arrest you, and you're probably going to go to jail for a long time. So can we reimagine how we think about helping people? Why does jail have to always be the next thing? You know? So
I can jump in. I think that's a beautiful way to get to the center of it. We bat no eyes at spending millions and billions to punish and incarcerate people. When you look at the price of incarceration in Vermont, it's around $95,000 a year to incarcerate a person. But we would never spend that kind of money to cover people's rent or their substance use treatment, their therapy, their education. And there's something really wrong about that. And, this gets back to, I'm sure a lot of people are used to us saying capitalism is the enemy, but it really is. It's created an individualized system where we're all to blame for the problems that we have. It's disintegrated community, true loving relationships, and that's a big piece of what we have to get back to. So when we envision what an alternative space is, we've heard from Wilden, Kareem, and Kira about, these are people that have ended up in bad situations or have had their basic human rights stripped from them. We cannot fight violence with violence. We cannot fight harm with harm. And I know what I'm asking is not easy, but where does the cycle of violence end? Somebody has to be brave enough to take a stand and say, you know what, this ends with us. Instead of punishing this person for harming us, we are going to wrap you with all the supports we have and see what kind of outcomes we get. So, and this could be as simple as lifting people out of poverty, having mental health treatment options that are consensual, that are survivor led, having substance use places where you can address your disorders and all those things. And, we're not starting from scratch. Vermont has some beautiful experiments already in motion. And if I can, just for a second, to shout them out, Pathways Vermont has a FACT program where they take folks with co-occurring disorders, usually like complex mental health disorders, where prison is especially inappropriate for them. And they have had an 80% success rate of folks not returning to long-term incarceration. Similarly, Jenna's Promise, if you haven't been there, I highly recommend. It was one of the most moving experiences of my life. They understand that recovery and reentry is holistic. They have 3-tiered transitional housing that allows you to move up or down depending on your needs. They have their own businesses on site for people to learn skills. They also match you with someone in an occupation you like. So if you want to be a teacher, they'll match you with a teacher. If you want to be a hairdresser, etc. They also engage you in yoga and therapy and family reunification. They understand that healing someone is a holistic process, and it's truly beautiful to see. And the last example I'll share is Sarah George and Vermonters for Criminal Justice Reform, Incentives for Success. They found that around like 60 folks are the majority of people committing like recurring crimes in our community. So once again, like instead of, locking John up, let's go to John. What's going on here? Let's pay you to come meet with someone and tell us about the root causes of your harm and try to connect you with services. And I believe she's graduated at least 10 folks. Don't quote me on that. But see, these are the type of life affirming programming we should be pouring our dollars into. Even taking a fraction of the Department of Corrections budget, 20, $30 million out of the 189 million, what kind of outcomes would we have? So I will leave it there to make sure there's time for Kira as well. And Wilda, whoever would like to go next.
Kira can go.
Kira, you're being tapped.
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, sorry, could you rephrase the question one more time?
Yes. What does healing and accountability look like outside of carceral systems?
Okay. Yeah. I think that so often, like, as a defense attorney, like, I'm just trying to get people acquitted, to be honest. So I have maybe a skewed perspective in that, like, I think healing would also include healing from like we think of like this binary system, right? Where it's like there are two categories of people, like perpetrators and victims. And it feels like we focus all of our resources on dividing people into those categories and then only considering healing for the victims. But like being criminalized is like such a violent process. And I also think that so often the state takes advantage of victims. Like I've had to call somebody who is like the alleged victim in my client's case and like tell her that my client's case was being appealed and say, hey, like just so you know, like your loved one's name like might be in the news again, and like I don't want you to like just like see it on the paper without having a conversation. And like I hope that the state is keeping you as the victim informed of this, but like I'm worried that they're not. And like she said, yeah, I had no idea this was happening, like thanks for telling me, I have a lot of questions, and I was like, okay, well, I can't really like advise you on that because my client is like suppose like the state is trying to set you up against my client, but like I have a colleague that's like fantastic and would do a pro bono like work with you to understand what's going on and like review the legal filings in the case so that you're not left in the dark about your own loved one and your own family's experiences. And like it was just like again, it's shocking but not surprising the way that the system is so violent that like even this like the victim's family where they're like persecuting my client by like making kind of a spectacle out of this victim and like her suffering, but they're not actually showing care for her. And so like both sides, both the like kind of contrived binary of like victim and perpetrator, like we true healing would I think involve like not spending time trying to create this binary in the first place and recognizing that like hurt people and like everybody deserves care in a way that really like the system is just such a false solution to actually providing that. And we see that in the way that victims are taken advantage of. Their stories are used to like whip people into like a carceral frenzy to lock other people up. And then they're just cast out once it's not like politically relevant for the persecution or the prosecution. So I think healing would really just look like taking all of our time and energy out of like the spectacle of the punishment system and really redirecting it like upstream, like you were saying, and just like asking people what they want as the first step rather than like using the performance of justice as like kind of the like vehicle for the ultimate point of the carceral system, which is like helping people profit off of punishing each other.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kira. Waldo, would you like to wrap us up on this one?
I think wrapping up was just summarizing. I think that, true accountability is about taking responsibility, about making amends, about changing behavior and structure so the harm doesn't occur again. And I think that's very different from punishment. I think that's something that we should hold on to. And also, we can't force accountability at the end of a gun or the end of a kind of forced injection. And while coercion can create compliance or silence, it can't create understanding. It can't create trust. It can't create repair. And so I think when we think about what healing and accountability looks like outside the carceral system, those are the things we need to hold on to. That we need spaces where people can speak freely without fear of being locked up. We need processes that are led by people who've been impacted by the harm. And we need investments in material conditions that reduce the likelihood of crises and conflict. That's my wrap up.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Okay, we are doing well, but we have one more question and then we'll go to Q&A if that works for everybody. What does a Vermont without prisons look like? And what do we need to get there, including policy recommendations, strategies, or other tactics? I can jump in first, unless somebody else would like to. Okay, okay, so I have three, I guess, broad recommendations. One would be, we kind of have to have a parallel strategy as we dismantle this system to ensure the people currently incarcerated are taken care of. And something that really worries me is the fact that we're only really able to hear one voice coming outside of the prisons, and it's the Department of Corrections. And that just creates a very, I would say, precarious situation where folks are able to cover up what's really happening. We're not able to hear the truth. And a fear of this, I guess not a fear. One of my biggest issues with Department of Corrections, not only Vermont, but across the country, is this system is incredibly hard to hold accountable. A lot of folks may be familiar when we had a lot of service providers, legislators, folks working in the prison, published a white paper detailing the atrocious abuses that were happening inside the prison. As a result of that, they were mandated to implement an oversight monitoring unit. And this oversight monitoring unit quietly sunset in 2024 without ever being implemented. And that didn't really have any consequences. Similarly, I was working with a woman who was incarcerated and, self-identified whistleblower. She wanted to testify to a state committee with me. What I think happened is the DOC caught wind of this and she wasn't able to participate with me virtually. And in addition, her power of attorney, who was a woman who was not incarcerated, was barred from attending with me too. So I did not attend because that felt like we were being silenced. And similarly, I've been trying to work for years to set up some kind of virtual testimony for people who are currently incarcerated to no avail. And I would say that is one of the number one things. We need to know what's happening inside there. We need to know the issues that people are dealing with and surviving on a daily basis. Similarly, we've heard a lot about who's really incarcerated in prison, how these are people that are deep in suffering. I think we need to invest in a robust needs assessment. Let's go in and figure out exactly what people need. Do they need substance use treatment? Do they need deep therapy? Do they need supportive housing? Let's figure that out so we can come up with what these cost figures would actually be to build up this coordinated system of care. And looking at Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility, there's only around 13 women as of May 2024 that have 5 years or more left until their minimum release date. So this shows us there's only going to be around a dozen people that are currently incarcerated that will even experience the new prison. And what a manageable number to start trying something else that's different. The 20 people won't create like a panic or whatever people are scared of. This is a beautiful number to start talking about what a long-term treatment plan could look like for a person that has committed high levels of harm in our community. And to close, I would say implementing transformative justice centers. I'm not going to be, you know, optimistic and pretend that no harm will ever not occur in our communities. So we need to build up the infrastructure and the skills and the transformative justice practitioners that are able to walk us through that harm. And something that I love about transformative justice is that it not only creates healing for the person that's been harmed, accountability for the person who has committed harm, but it gets at addressing the root causes of why that happened in the first place. It's about transforming the conditions that allowed this to happen. So, for example, if I'm a store owner and somebody comes in and is stealing from my business, not only are we going to talk about the harm there, but we're going to talk about, hey, why are you stealing? And maybe we'll figure out that this person that was stealing, their child has a prescription that they can't cover and they just lost their job. So we can figure that out. You know what I mean? The is Thank you. So yeah, using this mix of community-based solutions with mediation, restorative justice, transformative justice, this will start building up tools so we're not as scared to take the leap away from this punishment system.
Mm.
Thank you.
That's a tall one for me. When I read that question, when you emailed it to us, I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. I mean, I guess you have to understand, what does the country want? What does Vermont want? Because we can come up with so many different solutions of how, to get away from mass incarceration. But if we don't have the backing of the country and the state, what does it matter? I'm not saying we shouldn't fight now, Jana. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, where are we as a state and as a country when it comes to incarceration? Because I'll give you an example, a short example. So in New York, I supported my local police department in Harlem. We had a clergy person, law enforcement, an attorney from the public defender's office. We had a panel of people from different departments, right? And we had law enforcement, a detective who had information on all these kids in Harlem who were in gangs, and they had all the pictures. And so the idea was that we would tap on this kid's shoulder and say, we're going to bring you in, and we're going to sit in front of you. We're going to talk to you about, listen, we have a lot of information on you, young man or young lady. We want to give you the opportunity to stop what you're doing and not go to jail. That was working for a while. I mean, kids were coming left and right. And I was a part of the project that made sure kids weren't handcuffed, thrown in the back of a van. I said, listen, we're going to treat these kids like human beings, not like animals. And we're going to go approach them. We're going to talk to them about, listen, they got some stuff for you, young man. They have some information on you right now that can put you away for at least 2 years. Can you please let me help you? And I would be the one to bring them to the panel, and we would talk with them, and we'd figure it out. And the kids made the right choice. But they were given the opportunity to do that. They weren't just handcuffs were just thrown on and go to jail and figure life out later. So that's the outside piece. But as far as the jail itself, that's a big one. Because how do we get support from the state when we say we don't need jails? Now, don't get me wrong, there are some individuals I know personally that we need to figure out how to help them in a different way because they're not safe on the street. I know personally that, and it's around mental health, it's around addiction, all of it. So we have to figure out a different way how to help those individuals before they get put in a system and be forgotten forever. And they're going to come out in 5 years and do the same thing over and over. So what are we missing? What are we missing? Are we being really heard? Because I mean, we could come up with 1,000 solutions, but are we being supported by our state and our country on resolution and change?
So the question was, what does a Vermont without prisons look like? And I want to just name a danger in this conversation. Oppressive systems are preserved through transformation. We saw Jim Crow evolve into mass incarceration. And what I'm seeing now is mass incarceration evolving into mass medicalization. We are turning prison inmates into psychiatric patients. well, we say that most people in prison are mentally ill. There's no test for mental illness. This is a very subjective determination. There's ample evidence that Black and brown bodies are, diagnosed with severe mental illnesses when the same presentation is from a person who's not Black or brown. It's not. Pain is not a disorder. Distress is not a disorder. Suffering the effects of domestic violence is not a mental illness. And we have to reject this rhetoric and believing that people are in prison because of mental illness, or most people are in prison because of mental illness. It may be true that most people are in prison because they've been harmed by our system, but that does not make that's not an illness. That's a pain, that's wisdom, that's something, that's a truth that needs to be told. And so if we want to imagine a world without prisons, we have to imagine a world without coercion and control, not the physical bricks and mortars of prisons, but the conditions, but the ideology behind it, the ideology that some people need to be removed, some people need to be contained, some people need to be tightly controlled for the rest of their lives. That is what a world without prisons is. It's a world without that ideology. It's a world without that presumption. And we cannot imagine abolition without including psychiatric incarceration, because they are both part of the same. They both, the same logic underlines both systems. But I think to get there, we need to stop pouring resources into systems that use force and redirect those resources into the material and relational conditions that actually keep people safe. Stable housing, meaningful work, community, and non-coercive supports. Beautiful.
Yeah, I really appreciate everything that's been said, and I think that we have, in many ways, a long way to go. And especially echoing Hilda's concern about are we just evolving what we have? Or are we just, is prisons evolving into now the criminalization and coercive control over people that are deemed to have mental health issues or whatever, and making sure that we are abolishing this system where where corporations profit over a specifically racialized control and commodification of certain people. And what does it look like to take commodity out of it, to take profit out of it? That abolition in Vermont and everywhere looks like we design solutions based on what people are asking for, what people are saying works for them, what people are choosing to do to show care for each other, and not what we're stuck with because it's profitable for the industries that have designed prison facilities. And I think there's a lot of hopeful examples in Vermont of what a world without prisons would look like. I mean, in part because for a lot of our rural communities, we don't really have cops. And so we have neighbors helping each other. We have people getting to know each other. We have a lot of really relationships and consent-based care. And in a Vermont without prisons, we would just have a lot more resources that we're not spending on things that don't work to then devote to things that do. I imagine a Vermont without prisons to be a world where there's just stuff for people to do, community events, well-funded schools that don't look like prisons, well-funded free universal health care, that we don't have to struggle to pay for food, that we get to choose how we spend our time, rather than fighting tooth and nail to find employment that helps us pay rising rent, that there's affordable housing, that all of those things are intertwined with prison abolition. And that a lot of those elements and struggles are there. A lot of people in Vermont, I think, are craving that kind of stability and freedom, and like we have to believe it's possible.
Great. Thank you so much, Kira. Well, that concludes the panel section. Thank you all so much for listening and engaging. And now we're going to spend the last 15 minutes or so doing some Q&A. So if you have a question, I believe the wonderful Kate will be walking around with the microphone.
I'm going to try to field questions from the app and questions from the room, maybe alternating depending how many we get. And thank you for these incredible 4 speakers.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vanessa. I work for the state at the Human Rights Commission. First of all, I just want to say thank you for your time and the knowledge that you are imparting on all of us. Earlier, we heard Mohsen speak and talk about how it's important for us to divest from businesses that engage in organizations, products that are tied to genocide. And recently, earlier today, actually, I learned that some of our state's biggest mental health providers are going to be using a product that is an Israel-based company, and it's AI to conduct or take session notes and provide diagnoses based on those notes. And so I am kind of wondering, I would love to hear your thoughts and comments about that and how that can tie into mass psychiatric incarceration.
I can just jump in and say, this might not be exactly what you're looking for, but as prison abolitionists, one of the things we like to focus on is highlighting how all these systems of violence are so intimately connected. And I think that's unfortunately a great example of how these systems are sharing, coercive technologies and just using control as the basis for profit. And I fear that we will just see more of this if we do not start being serious about boycotting these systems that are okay with using our data against us, using control instead of care to, maintain a society. So that's what I will add, but I'm curious to see.
Yeah, and I would just say, if we are connected to anything that's harming people, period, is wrong. Like it's really simply put that way. Like, remember blood diamonds? There were people, kids harming themselves that get these little, small little diamonds that get it to the US and for nothing for them. So if we are connected to anything that is harming people for our betterment, for our convenience, not good, harmful.
We have a couple of questions from the app that are coming from remote viewers. And some of them are coming from last night's Fair and Impartial Policing panel, which touched on some of the same issues. And one was about the use of force and apparent mental health crises, including Scott Garvey, Aaron Laux, Aaron LaRoche. And I wonder if people have comments on, what would have been alternative ways to handle those situations. That was a question that was asked last night and kind of got cut off. So I wanted to raise it again.
I watched that panel last night and I got very angry with the responses from some of the people on the panel, and I don't want my anger to spill out here, and so, but I want to be upfront and say it angered me. The for those who weren't there, what I heard people say is that, the killing of Scott Garvey, a 55-year-old man who was in emotional distress, that called for help and was shot and killed by a police officer in his own home when he was unarmed. What I heard people on the panel say, that the problem was we don't have enough mental health services. You know, we don't have enough. He needed longer treatment. And the police shouldn't have been responding. Uh, there's just a basic. I think saneism allows people to be able to talk about these issues when they don't know anything about them. I think looking at the last, like the looking at the point where the trigger is pulled, is looking at the wrong part of the problem. People don't seem to understand that the mental health system and the and police, they go hand in hand. One can't exist without the other. Police don't show up at the door with the gun. Police show up at every step of the mental health system. The guy who comes to my office and takes me to the hospital, that's police showing up. You can't have forced drugging without police. You can't have involuntary hospitalization without police. Police don't just show up at your door. Police and the mental health system go hand in hand. If you took police out of the mental health system, it could not function. The second is when people say we need more mental health care, they don't understand the mental health system is a system of harm. So many people are harmed by the mental health system. It treats you not as a human being. It causes so much trauma, it doesn't even recognize it. I was supporting a woman with peer support who had been taken from her home, forcibly taken to the hospital, and then forcibly taken down the Brattleboro retreat. And I read her medical record, and it said, this patient appears very traumatized, but she hasn't experienced any trauma recently. I mean, that they don't recognize the harm of forcibly treating somebody. I got an email yesterday from a person who said that she couldn't participate in this, couldn't listen to this panel because she got a message when she registered online that you needed to use a computer and she couldn't use her handheld. And she said she couldn't use a handheld because she had been forcibly given electroconvulsive therapy that caused neurological damage. So she can no longer use, she doesn't, it harmed her so much that she can't use a computer. These harms are not insignificant. And so we don't need more of these harms. The mental health system, we don't need more of it. We need a different system based on care and not control. You can see me, you can see my anger, right? I mean, and I think sanism is real and it's deadly. This ideology that casts people in distress as dangerous, irrational, or less than fully human is what makes police shootings, forced drugging, and indefinite confinement seem necessary or unfortunate but justified. If we don't confront sanism with the same seriousness as we bring to racism, sexism, homophobia, and other oppressions, our reforms will keep landing in the wrong place. So what had to be different in Scott Garvey's case? I mean, the whole mental health system has to be different. Why do you think people don't go to the mental health system? Why do you think you have to force people on it? It's because the system is awful to you. Why do you think people deny that they have a mental illness or they need help? Because they don't want to be subjected to the oppression and discrimination that comes with the label of having a mental illness. We need to change the ideology of mental illness such that if you have a problem, if you need help, you don't lose all your rights by saying, I need someone to talk to. I need someone to listen to my truth. I want to stop these voices. But why do you have to choose between stopping the voices and losing your right to be human? Why can't you be both mentally ill and human? Okay, I've held it together as long as I can. That was great. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question for the panel. I'm Mitch Rotberg. I'm the senior counsel to the Human Rights Commission. And we do litigate cases against the Department of Corrections for discrimination on all kinds of people in all kinds of protected classes. And our agenda is even bigger. There's some cases that we haven't brought yet, but they're on the board to bring soon. One of the reasons we do this is because we believe that, a quote attributable to Dostoevsky, that the quality of any society is measured by the conditions of its prisons. And I know from my research and my work that the prisons in Vermont can be improved greatly. You've touched upon a number of things that we can do, and you now have a room of people who are engaged, interested, listening to you. What practical steps do you want us to take to start to reform the way in which we run our prisons here in Vermont? Because if any state can do it, I believe Vermont can do it. But we are here to march in that parade with you.
Very much appreciate the support. Okay. I would say our focus at Free Her isn't on how to improve the prisons, but how to decrease our reliance on the prisons. So I'm not sure if this is in your area of work or organizing, but what we really envision is community-based solutions to address the harm occurring in our community. If, you know, your office, your group could help us put weight behind asking for that, because, you know, it's easy to label us as, you know, far left activists that just want to remove a system. But when we have people that, you know, are respected professionals that have been doing work like this for decades, it helps add weight to what we're asking for. You know, if your area is focusing inside the prison, I would say going back to that oversight unit, making sure there's somebody there that is, you know, providing some kind of accountability for the Department of Corrections. And if we can start getting more, I would say, accurate understandings of the needs of people who are incarcerated in our prisons as well.
Yeah, and that was great. I would add, go to the jails, go to the prisons, talk to people. I mean,
Yeah.
literally sit across from them. Like last week, I sat across from a young man who told me that there's an 18-year-old guard who was messing with him every day, like literally just picking on him. And he said the reason why he's doing that because they used to be in school together at one point. So now he has authority over him where he can just make him go to the bathroom, not go to the bathroom, eat, not eat, you know? And there's the grievance process is a joke in the jails. I mean, it's not being exhausted, it's not happening. So go to the jails, talk to the inmates, talk to the staff, and figure out what could be done. That's a step one. And again, supporting you 100%. We need to decrease the reliance on prisons, but today we have a situation going on, right? We have people who are going in and people who are going to be there for a few more years. So what can we do about that? Talk to the people. Bring it back to legislators and say, hey, this is what the people said. They're not getting healthy food. They're sleeping in cold rooms. So who would you go crazy if you slept in a room for 3 days and freezing and cold and this much of material you're sleeping on? That would make anybody go crazy, I think. So yes, get into the jails, talk to people, do some good research with them, and then bring it back and then start that ball rolling. That's one thing I would do.
I would
We
just add,
have, sorry, go ahead, Kira. You go.
like, a really accessible way to like get more informed, like, from people that are most impacted is like having a prison pen pal. And if like everybody here is like wanting to work in that area, like I feel like that's an easy kind of bare minimum thing, is like starting a, like, you know, a relationship with somebody in prison through a pen pal program where the people on the inside are also like consenting to being your pen pal and to sharing their experiences with you. It can be like a really empowering and like I don't know, like you can get a really sweet friend out of it too. It can be life changing.
We're about at time,
The hand
which
is back.
stinks. Is there a question in the back?
Yeah.
Who was it? Jamie. Okay, we have about 15 minutes before the next panel, and I want to make sure people get a break, even though this is incredible. So let's try to make it concise to respect the next panel's time too.
Two questions or comments. One was, I became aware of somebody who was very dangerous in community who I found out was working as an officer in the Vermont criminal justice system. And I looked for a way to report them because I figured if they were behaving this way in the community, when they were given a position of power in the criminal justice system, they would be abusive to prisoners. And so I went through systems in Vermont to try to figure out what the mechanism was to report them. I think I ultimately ended up reporting them to the Attorney General's office, but there's no way to do any follow-up to find out if this individual who is dangerous is still in that position. I think they are. And so I just call attention to the fact that there are those of us in community who see folks who are dangerous and are looking for the mechanisms to hold them accountable and make sure they're not causing harm to people that are under their, I'm not going to use the word care, charge or whatever. So that's one comment. And the other is I was a political organizer in New Hampshire for a decade. And one of the things that was really interesting about what happened in New Hampshire was somebody came up with the Free State Project. And they looked at the Constitution in New Hampshire and they said, hey, let's get 10,000 people to move to New Hampshire and transform the political system. And what they've done is effectively create a libertarian state in New Hampshire over a decade. And I just sat here listening to all of you beautiful people and all of these beautiful ideas based in human rights and grounded in care. And I thought, what would be the opposite of the Free State Project? Why don't we create a vision for what a healed state would look like, write our manifesto, and invite everyone in the nation to come and move to Vermont and create that vision? Because they did it in New Hampshire in the opposite direction. So why not work to create that vision collectively? Because many times, one of the challenges I see when I look at healthcare reform in Vermont and other issues is that we do deal with the fact that spending on many of the programs that we care about greatly, and including 3 that I worked on, we don't have the financing in Vermont to make some of the things that we really want to see happen. I know we can shift our funding priorities, but I'm curious about what are other mechanisms we can use to continue to grow our ability to support this vision.
Love the idea of importing people to, as long as they bring a job and bring a house, great.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful what you're talking about, this like process of a collective, almost participatory visioning project of what Vermont could look like. And I feel like these kind of gatherings or listening sessions are vital to figuring out what's next because, Cream, Kira, Wilda, and I, we're just 4 people. We're not going to be the ones ushering in whatever this new world will look like. That's going to be something we have to do collectively. And sorry, trying to pick out the different threads. For funding, I know people might not be happy about this, but the Department of Corrections has $189 million annually at their disposal. I think that is a very great space for us to start, using resources to fuel projects that we believe in, that we can start tracking outcomes, like Kareem ran an amazing program, life interventions teams that kept people from being unhoused. And we need to be funding programs like that, and we're not anymore. So just thinking about our priorities and taking from these punishment-based systems, I think is vital. Not sure if I touched on all your things there, but
Thank you, everybody.
yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks.